in general, what is it, how you're supposed to perform an IT audit, why is it important, etc. So IT audit is something that is becoming more and more important nowadays, just because of all the regulatory compliance that is coming out right now. For instance, we have the National Institute of Technology that is going to release this year the CMMC, which is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, where now if you're a business and you want to you want to bid for a government contract, or you want to do business with the Department of Defense, or you want to apply for a government contract, you'll need to be compliant with this new CMMC framework. Now, to be compliant with the CMMC framework, you need to go through an audit that's going to certify you. Now, back in the day, it was a voluntary framework. Now, it's going to be mandatory. So that's why, especially this year, IT audit is going to be a big thing. Now, whether you are a small law firm, a real estate company, or a university, or even a Fortune 500 company like Uber, you will you have what we call technology risk, and cyber hack is on the rise, and this is something we see basically on a monthly basis. Now, because organizations are using technology, they bring what we call technological risk. Now, in itself, technology is not an end goal. It's a support function. Businesses are using technology basically to improve their productivity, to stay competitive, or to increase the quality of service that they offer to their customer. That's why they use technology. It's an operational tool. Now, technology needs to match the business goal. So because businesses are using technology to improve their operation, it brings to the business something we call technological risk. And these risks, they need to be managed. They need to be addressed. Now, one of the first thing that an IT audit is going to do is to perform what we call a risk assessment. So a risk, by definition, is literally the intersection between a threat, an asset, and a vulnerability. So by asset here, I'm mostly referring to informational asset, not fixed asset. For instance, let's say you have a web server, which is basically a computer that is hosting your website. Now, this is the asset. The threat is the probability for a hacker to, let's say, perform an attack like a denial of service on this web server, where this web server will be non-responsive. Basically, they will send like thousands of requests to the server and make it non-available to the legitimate users. Now, the vulnerability can be on this server hosting your website. Let's say you're using a piece of software called Apache. And then in this piece of software that is running your web server, the Apache software has a bug, and you didn't install the security fixes or the patches to address this vulnerability. Now, the risk is that there is a probability for a threat, like the attacker, to exploit this vulnerability on your asset. And the asset in this case is the web server. Now, that's the risk. So the risk is basically the likelihood or the probability times the magnitude of impact or the level of impact that is going to happen on the server. Let's say this web server is very important for you. Let's say you are a company like Amazon, where you don't have physical store, but your whole entire business is based on a model where everything is done online. Now, this web server is high risk, because if your web server is down, which contains your website, then this means basically your business model is going to go to zero because you will not be able to sell because Amazon is fully online. Now, that's a risk. So to start with the risk assessment, you basically need to start with inventory of your asset, your informational asset. You need to put in place what we call a risk register. And this risk register doesn't necessarily need to have only IT risk. It can have operational risk, all the IT risk, and each risk needs to be assigned to a risk owner in the organization. Because at the end of the day, you cannot protect something that you don't know. So if you don't know that you have this asset, then you cannot protect it. That's why it's crucial to have an accurate inventory management system to track all your device, to make sure that all your informational assets are properly managed. So that's how you want to perform the risk assessment, which is basically the first step of performing an IT audit. Once you've listed all the risk and you have categorized the risk based on the type of data they are hosting, you prioritize the risk and you understand the risk that the organization has, you need to protect these assets and mitigate these risks. How do you mitigate this risk? Is basically by implementing what we call security control. There is different type of security control. One of the type is a physical control. Basically, a physical control is something like a CCTV camera system or a gate to protect your facility or a security guard. You have technical control. A technical control can be, for instance, this device called firewall that you are going to put or configure between the internet and your web server, which is hosted in your local area network, to make sure that any type of incoming traffic or attack from the internet is protected and your web server is protected. This is a technical security control. This is basically something that you configure on your information system. So the security control is a mechanism or a process that you put in place to mitigate the risk. And I say process because the security control can also be what we call an administrative control. For example, you can have a policy or a procedure. A policy is a document that explains from a high level overview what the organization has decided to do in terms of technology information security program. While a procedure will explain step by step how, for instance, to configure this firewall, how to implement the firewall from a technical perspective. It's basically a playbook on how step one, step two, step two. While the policy doesn't really go into much detail. For example, in your organization, there is a policy which is an administrative control that says, oh, whenever we are hiring a new employee, you need to perform a background check. Or whenever there is a new hire, this new hire, before they can start working, they need to go through what we call an information security awareness training program. Or if there is existing employee, they need to perform training every year. That's an administrative control because it is a policy, a document that the management signed off on it that's explain this is what we are going to do. Now, there is preventative control, detective control, corrective control, depending on what type of security control you're gonna put in place to mitigate the risk. It can be preventative. For example, you have a gate, for example, this prevent someone to cross and get into the facility. Detective, for example, a detective control can be, for instance, honeypot that will try to discover whether there is a current attack happening. It will detect the attack. A corrective control can be what we call, for instance, a business continuity plan. It is a detective control, corrective control, because it's going to happen after the fact. Let's say there is a earthquake or a tsunami, and then your whole entire building collapse. Now, you should have a business continuity plan which is going to correct the situation, which means based on this plan will lay out and say, oh, this is how we are going to resume operation. Now, these are all different type of security control and how you can mitigate a specific risk that you have listed. So it's not only, in terms of risk management, it's not only the only way to address risk. Yes, you can mitigate the risk, but you can also avoid the risk. Well, in my business, I'm going to say, I don't need a web server. I'm not going to use this technology at all. So I'm avoiding the risk. I'm not going to put in place a web server, and hardware, and the whole technology behind, whether you are using Apache or IIS server. I'm not going to do that. I'm avoiding the risk. You can transfer the risk. That's usually what you do when you buy an insurance policy. You transfer the risk to a third-party vendor. Or you can accept the risk. Let's say you have a web server, but you are not Amazon. It's not critical for your organization. So you say, oh, the value of this web server is X. Now, to protect this web server by implementing a firewall, the cost of me implementing the firewall to protect the web server is Y. Now, Y is higher than X. Why would you do that? In terms of business decision, this is not wise because remember, technology is just a tool to support the business operation. Now, the business can decide, oh, I'm not going to spend the money to implement this security control because the value of my asset, in this case the web server, is lower than the cost for me to implement the security control. Then I'm just going to accept the risk, as long as this is documented. So basically, what do you need to do for an IT audit? The whole reason we need to have an IT audit is to manage risk exposure, understand what is the level of your cybersecurity maturity, also to address probability of you having vulnerabilities inside of your information system. And by vulnerabilities, I mean, for instance, specific software from a third-party vendor that is not patched or not updated because there is a vulnerability that was discovered and you didn't apply the update yet. And also to meet regulatory compliance. So these are all reasons why organizations would want to perform an IT audit. How do you actually do the IT audit? One of the first steps is to clearly define the objective of the audit and make sure both parties, the auditor and the auditee, understand the scope of the audit. Because you are going to receive, for instance, an engagement letter that will say this audit is going to be performed within this time frame for this specific information system. Now, the audit can cover the whole information system of the organization, but it can also as well be just a specific part of the information system. The audit scope could be, oh, this year we are going to audit a specific application and the database engine behind it. Now, if the audit scope is this specific SAP application or whatever the ERP system you're using, so we are going to now roll the audit to this specific application. They are going to review, for example, the access control that you have in place for the users using only this application. They are going to perform some tests on this application to make sure whether the application is updated or the operating system supporting this application is updated. Whether you have another logistic system or another system in place, they are not going to look at it. So you define the scope. Then, one of the most important things when you're planning the audit is that you need to have a criteria. Now, a criteria is usually an established framework that you are going to use as a guideline to perform the audit. And this framework usually has a set of security control that you need to review. There is a lot of security framework out there. For example, you have the NIST 853, which has a bunch of security control. So as the auditor, you are going to use this criteria to make sure all the security control listed, you're going to test them and review them for the organization. You have the HIPAA framework, which is related to people like to business like clinic or hospital that are hosting some personal identifiable information, such as protected healthcare information. You have the ISO 27001. This is mostly used for international organization, and versus the NIST, which is mostly used for US companies. You have the process code framework, which is the PCI, where you can use that for people that are hosting credit card information. And also you have the CMMC, which is basically based on the NIST 800-171, but this CMMC framework is now the mandatory version of the NIST 800. So these are all framework, and each of them can have hundreds of security control. So for example, the NIST 800-171 has 110 security control that you need to review, and HIPAA, the ISO 2022 has like 93 security control. So as an auditor, you are going to use this framework to base your audit and review basically a checklist. Use it as a checklist. So something that's important as an IT auditor is because we see that often where the auditor will come maybe as a consultant, and they will literally try to tell the business what to do. Oh, this is the way you need to do it. No, part of the planning process, you really need to take time to understand how the business is working, to understand the culture of the organization, to make sure that, well, inside of the organization, what are the most important operation for the business to run. Let's say, for example, the CEO has local admin privilege. Well, this should not be the case, for example. Well, based on the least privilege principle, you know that the CEO shouldn't have local admin right on his computer. But now, because as an IT auditor, you need to understand the culture of the organization, you need to figure out first, is the CEO not having admin right on their computer will disrupt the business operation or will prevent some operational task to be performed. Now, if this is the case, you need to think about, okay, how can we comply to this security control, which is the least privilege? Maybe there is some compensation control you can put in place. Maybe there is a way to create 2 accounts for the CEO so he can only use a standard account. It's not about telling the organization, oh, no, we need to get rid of this situation. No. Understanding the business culture and the environment is crucial to perform a very good audit. Now, we've seen how to perform why is it important to perform an audit? We've seen what is an IT audit. Now we are going to try to understand how do you actually perform the audit. So the audit, if you are an IT auditor or if you are the auditee, this will be useful because you will be able to understand the whole process. The first step is the planning. So in the planning, you are going to send the audit notification letter to the auditee that will tell them we are going to perform the audit, what time, what is the scope of the audit, and you are going to gather some background information. At this point, you are going to perform a lot of interviews with the employee, understand the culture of the organization, and then, of course, the risk assessment by identifying the risk, making sure that they have a risk register to make sure that you understand what you are going to audit, evaluate the current risk, and then you create the audit program. Now, the entrance meeting is basically the kickoff meeting where you will have the sponsor of the audit project. You will have all the stakeholders that is part of the project to basically explain what is the outcome, what is expected from them. And then after the entrance meeting, you're gonna have the field work. Well, the field work is the most important phase of the audit. It's where all the work is being done. Then in this field work, you are going to conduct interviews, review documentation, etc., and test the security control that they have. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later because the field work is basically the main course of the project. And then at the end of the field work, we are going to have the reporting phase. And the reporting phase, basically, you are going to draft a report. And this report is going to display the project, the scope of the audit, what they did, the finding they had, the recommendation they have based on the testing they've done. They are going to list all the security control, what you said in your policies that you should be doing, and what they found out, whether your security control are actually working, or are they actually effective. So they are going to list all of that in the actual document and submit to the management the report. Now, once they submit the report to the management of the company, this is only a draft. They need to wait for the feedback or comment from the management because you may find a flaw or you may have a finding and then you put it in the report and the management of the company does not agree because maybe you missed something or they had actually a compensating control that you were not aware of, and then they're gonna have some feedback. Oh, I don't want that, and yes.
First off, management always disagrees. You mentioned scope when you were talking about reporting. It's in the report. Do you do scoping in the planning, or in the entrance meeting, or in field work? I'm kind of curious. It doesn't say up there. Where do you think scoping belongs?
No.
Of identifying what we're going to actually audit.
The scope is going to be mentioned in the report, but the actual scope is decided in the planning phase. Absolutely. That's literally one of the first steps of the planning phase because, like I said earlier, you may not be able to, if you don't define the scope in the planning phase, you may not be able to audit the whole organization. Maybe they want to audit this specific application. That's the scope. So we are going to only audit this application. So you scope the audit in the planning phase. Now, well, management always have feedback and comment about the report. Now, there is going to be a little bit of back and forth with the report, and then at the end, after they agree with every finding and recommendation, now the management need to sign off on the report and create, based on the report, what we call a poem. The poem is basically the follow-up. the poem is the plan of action and milestone. It's going to be this project document from the organization that is going to dictate, oh, okay, we got an audit report. Now we have all these findings and recommendation. Now this is our plan to remediate all the findings. This poem, plan of action and milestone, is going to have time, date, and how the business is going to remediate all these findings, especially if they need to be compliant. So this need to be done in a timely manner. So this is literally the audit process. That's what's going to happen both on your side as the auditee and on the auditor side. Now, the field work, like I said earlier, is where you're going to put your boots in the ground. You're going on the field. Right now, field work are being done remotely with screen sharing, but back in the day, the field work was always on site. That's where all the auditors are going to come to the organization. They are going to observe how you perform your operation. They are going to reconciliate. They are going to test. They are going to review your policy. They are going to take sample within your organization. Maybe they're going to take some end users and ask them questions and test your security control. So one of the first thing they are going to do is review your IT policies and procedure. Maybe you don't have them at all. Maybe you have them, but they are not updated. They are going to review your access control. How do you make sure, for example, that there is segregation of duties in place, that someone cannot perform any type of fraud because, oh, Joe was in the marketing department. Now he left, he was transferred to the HR department, and now he retained all the marketing department and the new HR control, which can cause conflict of interest. Network security, we are going to review what are the controls that you have in place to protect your network. Physical security, within your data center, do you have some environmental control like sensors that will tell you what is the temperature inside of the data center? What is for example, you need to have some UPSs that can provide you alert whenever there is no more electricity. Do you have fire extinguisher in place? Stuff like that. Vendor management. This is extremely important nowadays because, for example, what hacker started doing, and one of the most common example for this vendor management review is the SolarWinds attack. Now, a hacker, what he's going to do, why would you try to hack the Pentagon? Because they have all the bells and whistles in terms of cybersecurity. They are very mature. So what you do as a hacker, you try to hack a third-party vendor that works with the Pentagon. So because this small business company, they may have not enough fund to implement strong security control. So it is very common now to, even though the end goal is to hack a specific Fortune 500 company, what the hacker is going to do is to try to hack a third-party vendor that works with this company and go through their system into the huge company. It's why now it's important to put in place a vendor management policy review to make sure that, for example, your organization is a Fortune 500 company, you're buying this piece of software from this small company that developed this software. Now you're using this software from this third-party vendor inside of your organization. The vendor review policy will say, oh, do they have a secure software development lifecycle they put in place to make sure that this software that we are buying from them is really secure? Otherwise, even though you have a very secure system inside of your organization, just because you're using this third-party vendor software, now you have a vulnerability because you didn't do a vendor review of this third-party software. Security awareness training. We all know the weakest link in the chain is human. The human or the end user will click on the phishing link or try to install something they should not install, and that's why it's very important. We will review if you have a security awareness program, and if you have it, did all the end users completed the training at 100%? Sometimes management or the CEO don't have time to do it and they don't do it, which is a finding. Data security, what type of data you are hosting in your information system? Do you have PII? Do you have protected health information? And how do you secure them? Do you have a data classification in place? Do you make sure that everybody in the organization knows this is a type of confidential information, this is sensitive, this is top secret? Or do you have a clean desk policy? Because people sometimes print a document, they leave it in the printer or on their desk, and this document may have some sensitive contract information or sensitive medical record. Now, you need to have a clean desk policy. Incident response. Do you have an incident response in place to make sure that if something happened, everybody knows how to react? We need to do tabletop exercise where everybody meet on a quarterly basis to repeat what they will do, and you basically have some case scenario where you make sure that, oh, this quarter we are going to have a case scenario of an inundation. So everybody, the operation director, the IT manager, need to get together and perform tabletop exercise to make sure that they know whenever the incident happens exactly what needs to be done. Of course, at the end of all this field work, we are going to perform the send the final report, which is a comprehensive document that will list all the findings, what we test, what criteria, what framework did we use, and send it to all the stakeholder party that was part of the project. You can also list all the strengths of the organization in the report. You can say, oh, they do that well, this is what they do perfectly, and this is their weakness as well. So I wanted to share with you one of the top findings audit that we find in general in an IT audit. Most of the time, they will have no IT policies at all, or if they have them, it will be outdated because you need to update this on a yearly basis. Or they will have weak access control, like there is no separation of duties, and they have insufficient data backup, because it's not good enough to back up your data. You also need to test your data on a yearly basis, like perform a simulation of restoring your backup, because sometimes backup are not done properly. So you need to make sure that you do the backup, but also test the backup. Outdated software in patch management, inadequate network security, lack of security awareness training. They don't do that at all. They don't have a program for that. You can either buy a vendor where you have online videos, or you can perform on-site training where everybody get together in a room and you perform some training for all the end users on what they need to do, what they can do, how to behave in terms of cybersecurity awareness. And inadequate incident response planning, this is very common because sometimes organizations need to perform what we call a business impact analysis to make sure that they can know what business unit is highly sensitive, what business unit is very critical for the organization, and that way they can prioritize risk. So, to conclude, I would like to ask you a question. Have you ever lost your phone, and in this phone there was some memorable moment, or the birthday picture of your daughter, but you didn't have the time to back it up, and now you lost the phone and this picture is gone forever? Have you ever spilled water or coffee on your laptop, and you were working on this very important report that took you days to create, Now, you will never be able to open the laptop, which means you will never be able to recover this report because it's gone forever. Now, I've been working for an IT managed service provider where one of our client had a ransomware attack, and when we went to restore the backup, we noticed that their backup was done 360 days ago. Which means basically the business is going out of business. They have no data, no accounting, no information on their client because their last backup was done 360 days ago. Now, how do you avoid this? By performing an IT audit. If they did an IT audit on a regular basis, the auditor will have told them that their backup is not performing well. Now, by not performing an IT audit, you run the risk of your business going out of business or filing for bankruptcy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Any questions for Gael? So I have a question. This example that you just gave, you said